Hello and welcome. Today we're going to be talking about all of the cool new stuff that you're going to find in SharePoint Framework version 1.8. This was released in the first quarter of 2019. There's a lot of really cool features that I want to go over. Some of these were in preview in 1.7, and they're now fully released and fully supported by Microsoft and the team. And there's a whole bunch of changes here. It's quite a big update, so let's jump right in and take a look at what is new. The biggest change is probably that they upgraded a lot of the dependency versions, including dependencies like React, if you're choosing the React-based web part template, or if you're using React in an extension, and the Office UI Fabric has been updated as well. They have also decoupled the TypeScript version. It's not built into their build process anymore. You can actually choose between 2.7 or 3.3, for example, and I'll show you how to kind of upgrade that. Some really exciting features that I think a lot of people are excited about are features that were in 1.7 as preview are now fully released, like the ability to have your web parts as Microsoft Teams tabs. So we're going to take a look at that today. It's a really cool feature. They also have the ability to set up what are called web part app pages, which is kind of like having a web part function as a single page app. There's also a new ability on modern page sections to apply a section background. And so you can update your web parts to support different color section backgrounds, which we're going to take a look at. And then a new security feature called isolated domains. This is honestly probably for some specific use cases when you're using APIs for things like Microsoft Graph or Azure, and you just want some added security to your keys, your security keys and API keys that you're using. There's a kind of a neat feature called isolated domains that you can do there. There's also a really exciting feature that hopefully is going to be released fairly soon in a new update. It's currently in preview, so you can only use it when you run the Yeoman generator and with a plus beta flag, but it's called library components. And we'll talk a little bit about what those are, but it's a pretty exciting feature you'll be able to use in conjunction with your SharePoint Framework solutions that you're building. So probably the biggest thing that we should talk about in 1.8 is the dependency versions, because a lot of them have been updated and there's quite a few changes here, and honestly, quite a few breaking changes. So you may have some issues upgrading your 1.6 or your 1.7 solutions to 1.8, or even if you're starting from scratch in 1.8, a lot of folks are having some issues. So I'm going to kind of go over those and help you guys through that. But the big things are obviously 1.7 has been upgraded to 1.8. So there's quite a few dependencies that go along with that are upgraded. React has gotten a big upgrade. So it's going from 15.6 to 16.7. And that's there's quite a few features in React that were added since 15.6. So we'll take a look at those in just a moment. Unfortunately, what they did for some reason is the TypeScript types for React are going from 15.6, but they have only been upgraded to 16.4.2. So even though behind the scenes, technically the dependency React is on version 16.7, the TypeScript compiler, which bundles your solution, only does the linting and the compiling for React version 16.4. So basically what that boils down to is even though you have React 16.7 as a dependency, you can actually only use React version 16.4 because otherwise the linter is going to throw errors whenever it's building your solution. So we'll take a look at that in a moment as well. Office UI Fabric has gone from 5.21 to 6.143. This one is probably the one that's causing the most issues because Office UI Fabric React version 6 has a dependency on a modern version of React, whereas we're kind of using a previous version of React, and it's causing all these headaches, and a lot of issues have basically come up if you're using Office UI Fabric inside of your solutions. I'm going to show you how to get around that. There's something I've been doing that just seems to help quite a bit. And again, even if you're starting from scratch, not if you're just not only for upgrades, but even if you're starting a new 1.8 web part or extension from scratch, you may run into issues with Office UI Fabric React in particular. So I'll look at some ways we can work around that, and hopefully we'll get you guys started and up and running in the new version of SharePoint Framework. New stuff since React 15.6, we have error boundaries that landed in 16.0. Forwarded refs landed in 16.3. And then a couple features like suspense lazy and hooks, very exciting new features in React, but unfortunately, again, because we have only the types from React 16.4, you won't be able to use those the newest features, the cutting edge features in React. You can only use error boundaries and forwarded refs, which are some pretty cool features, and you may find uses for those. But hopefully in an upcoming update to SharePoint Framework, we'll get the most recent version of React where we can use all the exciting new stuff that is available there. And also, don't let me forget, there's apparently a mascot now for SharePoint Framework. His name is Parker, and I don't know anything about this. I don't know why, but there it is. So have fun with that. Okay, cool. So let's jump into the command line. And if you're starting from scratch with SharePoint Framework 1.8, you can just run the normal yo Microsoft /SharePoint, and that's going to run the generator and set up a project from scratch for you. So that's fairly easy to do, but if you are upgrading from either SharePoint Framework 1.6 or 1.7, you will have to do a few extra steps because, again, the dependencies have changed quite a bit. Even the build process with decoupling TypeScript has changed quite a bit. So you're going to have to make some changes and probably do a bit of debugging to get your solution to build, because there is a completely new version of TypeScript that's compiling everything, and that just tends to cause all sorts of random errors that I can't really tell you how to fix, but we can at least do it with this web part so you can sort of see an example. But also we need to upgrade all of our dependencies to use the new dependencies they set up in 1.8. So we're going to be working with our dashboard web part. This is the web part we built throughout the duration of this course. And this was originally built in 1.6. Upgrading to 1.7 is pretty easy. You just upgrade the versions and it should be good to go. But in this case, we're going to upgrade it all the way to 1.8. So we're going to have to do some extra things to configure it and get it to build successfully. So first of all, let's go ahead and open this up in Visual Studio Code. Let's take a look at our package.json file, which we already have open here. And the first thing you're going to want to do is just take all the instances that are referencing 1.6.0, and let's select all those and update those to 1.8.0. So that's going to upgrade most of the dependencies to their latest version. And as I mentioned, we need to upgrade both React and React DOM to 16.7.0, which is the latest version of React. But the types, for whatever reason, I don't know why they did this, but the types /React has to be version 16.4.2, and the types for React DOM has to be 16.0.5. So those are kind of lagging behind a bit, and you do need to set those versions to make sure that your project will build. There's also a new package you're going to have to add. I'm going to just copy and paste this from a brand new 1.8 solution that I've built. But you need to import this SPTSLint rules version 1.8.0. So go ahead and paste that into your dev dependencies down here. And you also need to choose which compiler you want to use. And basically they have some stuff you can copy and paste from the documentation. And again, you could just build a brand new 1.8 solution and kind of copy the package.json from there to see what changed. But basically what you can do is you can import, they have these things called the rush stack compilers. And in this case, it uses TypeScript version 2.7. You could also change this to 3.3, I think is one of the versions. You have to change this number over here. But I think in general, they recommend you use version 2.7 of TypeScript. So I don't know the differences and the nuance between all the different versions. But in this case, you do have to add this rush stack compiler. And in this case, we're going to use TypeScript version 2.7. And also with that, you need to open up your tsconfig file, and we'll go ahead and paste in a line again from a new solution, or you can paste from Microsoft's documentation, but it's basically just extending the rules from that rush stack compiler 2.7. Great, so that is most of the stuff we need to do. A good idea is to just go into your console and real quickly just go ahead and run an rm-rf node modules. That will go ahead and delete any node modules that you already had installed. Since so much change, sometimes it's just a little bit easier to start from scratch, and then just go ahead and run an npm install, and it's going to go and install all of those dependencies that we just updated in our package.json file. Okay, now that all of those packages have been installed, we can go ahead and run a gulp serve, and you're probably going to see some errors when you run this. Whenever it tries to build, you're going to see here, we'll probably get some errors, and this is the point where you basically have to start debugging your solution, because there's so many changes with the compiler and the build process that it's just very likely that you're going to have some issues you need to work through in your solution. You'll see here with this dashboard web part, we're using Office UI Fabric, and the new version of Office UI Fabric that they have in SharePoint Framework version 1.8. Like I mentioned, there's just a lot of issues a lot of people have had with the change in React version versus what they use in Office UI Fabric. It's just very complex, and in Fabric, they actually have a really rapid release cycle too. So it's really hard to use the latest version because they're always using kind of the cutting edge stuff. So if you see an error in your solution when you're upgrading it that has to do with UI Fabric or Office UI Fabric or something like that, what I would recommend you do is just go ahead and let's hit Control C to stop this build process. And so what we can do is let's jump into Visual Studio Code, and you'll notice there's this solution or this dependency right here rather, Microsoft/SP Office UI Fabric Core. It's using version 1.8. And this is the dependency that's pulling in the issue, the UI Fabric dependency that we're having issues with at this moment. So what I usually do to fix this, and this is something you can do on pretty much all your 1.8 projects, even when you're starting from scratch, a lot of folks are having issues with 1.8 and Office UI Fabric in particular. Let's just go ahead and run an npm uninstall, and then we'll do -- save to make sure we uninstall that package. And again, that's Microsoft SP Office UI Fabric Core. So let's go ahead and just completely remove that because we're having issues with it. And instead, what we're gonna do is we're gonna install some of its dependencies directly. So rather than importing the SPFx Office UI Fabric package, which has its issues with it, we can go ahead and run npm install a package called Office UI Fabric React. And then we're going to specify the version, and we're going to kind of downgrade this to be a little bit of an older version. So we're going to use 5.135.0. And again, we're going to use the save flag to go ahead and save that dependency. And basically what we're doing is we're still using Office UI Fabric React. So we're still using basically the same dependency that we had before. We're just going to specify more specifically which version of Office UI Fabric React we want to use. And then that way we know we can get a version that's actually going to work with our solution in this case. And now that we've done that, let's go ahead and run gulp serve, and we're still going to get some issues, but hopefully we're not going to see any errors related to Office UI Fabric. So you can see in this case, we still have errors, but that's actually a good thing because you'll notice none of the errors have to do with the dependency. They are all errors within our application, and that means we can fix them. So you can see I'm basically just going to start at the top, and we'll go to each one of these files and kind of deal with any linting errors that we may have in Visual Studio Code. So the first file that we're having an issue with is property pane color palette.ts. So let's jump into Visual Studio Code. I'll open up property pane color palette.ts. Okay, and you'll see the linter here is saying, hey, this is declared as value never read, which apparently is a breaking change in the new version of TypeScript that we've defined here. So I'm just going to delete that and save. And if you go back to the hyper here, you'll notice that we've moved on to the next file, which is colorpalette.tsx. And that's basically the process. You go one at a time into each of these errors. You go to that file, you fix it so that the linter is happy, and then you just keep repeating that until we are good to go. So let's open up colorpalette.tsx. We'll go through here and look for the little squigglies. So you can see in this case, it's complaining that argument type of null is not assignable to type string. So that's using the onChanged thing down here. So I think how we can fix this is we'll just say this could be null. So we'll say it's a string or null. And then I guess we're trying to set an array to an index of null, which isn't going to make sense. So let's cut that and we'll move it down here. And we'll just say else updated color of index equals new color. And I think that should fix that issue. So next we're on to colorswatch.tsx, Colorswatch. And this one looks like is an unused dependency. I think that's the only thing there. So we'll let this refresh. We have a few things in -webpart.ts. It looks like we have a whole unused dependency here, and then an unused dependency down there as well. And now we have chart.tsx. And if we scroll, and I'm looking over here, you see those little red lines. It's kind of indicating how far I have to scroll to find those. But it looks like, I don't even know what type never is. So I think it's just complaining about the types here because we're building out a data set as well as this data object up here. So let's just add some generics here. So labels will be an array as string array. And then data sets are objects. So I guess we could do as any. We'll just use generic there to kind of type that and fix that a bit. And this is still complaining about dataset.data.pushValue. So maybe we'll also do data as any here. And then that should fix. Yeah, so it looks like it's good now. So I just made these 3 changes. I just typed each of these arrays. So it looked like the new compiler didn't like that this was an untyped array. So I just specifically whitelisted these as generics. And in the case of labels, it's a string array. And let's jump back into Hyper. And it looks like we are good to go at this point. So let's pull up our local workbench. And let's go ahead and add our web part and just make sure everything is working. It looks like our web part is back to a working state, and we've now upgraded to SharePoint Framework 1.8. Great. Okay, so now that we have successfully upgraded our web part and it's running in SharePoint Framework version 1.8, let's go ahead and jump into Visual Studio Code. And the first thing I want to show you guys is how to deploy this and configure the web part so that we can actually use it as a Microsoft Teams tab, which is a great new feature that was in preview in 1.7. It's now fully released in 1.8. And the first thing we're going to want to do is we're going to open up our web part manifest file, which in this case is -webpart.manifest.json. And we're going to add a new property here called supported hosts. And this is an array that you can add to your web part manifest file. And whenever you set up a new 1.8 solution from scratch, if you chose the web part template, you're going to notice it already contains this setting, and the array contains SharePoint web part. So if you're upgrading, it's a good idea to go ahead and add that to this array. Again, it's supported host and array, and then we're going to contain SharePoint web part here. But we can also add, if we want to use this on Microsoft Teams, we can also add, you'll see in the autocomplete here, SharePoint, or rather Teams tab. So that's a new supported host that we can add to the manifest file, indicating that we want this web part to be usable inside of Microsoft Teams. And now that we have added the Teams tab to our supported host, we need to create a Teams folder inside of our solution. So just call it Teams. Whoops, not Dreams, but rather Teams. And then within this folder, we're going to have to create a new file, and we're going to call this manifest.json. And we're going to have to fill this file with some content. So I will give you guys a link to this page. It's from Microsoft's documentation. And basically what we want to do is we want to come down to this manifest.json file right here. I clicked on copy, so we have copied this. Let's paste that into our file. And then you'll notice as you scroll through this file, there's a couple places where they have kind of a template where they have these double curly braces, and it says SPFx component alias. And if you go back to this link that I'm going to send you guys, you'll see if you scroll down a bit, it's basically telling you to copy and paste some stuff from our web part manifest file. So in this case, the component alias is just the alias property in the web part manifest. So let's look for alias, and you'll see that here. So we'll paste that over alias. SPFx component name is going to be the title from the pre-configured entries down here. So let's paste that in. And then the description is the description from the pre-configured entries down here. So let's go ahead and replace both the short and the full description with the same thing. And then if you scroll down a bit, there's actually 3 places where they list the SPFx component ID. So that's listed 1, 2, 3. So outline, color, and also down in this URL down here. And that's actually going to be the ID property from our web part manifest file in this case. So let's paste that in all 3 of those locations. And you'll actually notice that we're specifying icons. So these are files that you can create to kind of to customize what the icon looks like whenever somebody's going to add a new tab, and you can kind of customize what this app looks like or this tab looks like in that screen. And if you create a new solution from scratch, it's actually already going to have 2 sample image files in the Teams directory that you can use by default. And what I'm going to do in this case, I'm actually going to open this in Finder, and I'm just going to paste 2 files, 2 of the image files that I copied from another solution. So these are the default files you can see here. It's just a little picture of gears, and then the color one's a larger picture. But you can basically replace those with a custom image if you want. But the file name does have to match your component ID. So again, it's a good idea to go ahead and rename this. You want to keep _color on the end of it. And on the second one, we need to keep _outline on the end. But I'm just going to paste in that same component ID on both of these images so that it matches the 2 file names that you see right here. Again, all I did there was just paste in the images that come default with a brand new SPFx 1.8 solution. You just open up the Teams folder and it's already going to have these in there. But if you're upgrading, you do have to create those images manually like we've done here. And then finally, it's a good idea to replace this ID with something unique. In this case, I have, if I open a new tab, we created a tool here called SP Engineer that gives you this engineer command. But one of the commands it actually does is I can just do engineer GUID, and it already copies this GUID, this brand new random GUID to my clipboard, which I can then just come in and paste in. And just in case you want to find a link to that utility, I'll also post a link to that in the video description down below. But basically, it just has to be a unique random string of numbers that matches this sort of GUID format that you see here. Cool. So let's save that file. We have set up our Teams manifest file. And often in your web part, you may want to determine whether or not you're displayed inside of a Teams tab or if you're just on a SharePoint page. So there is a new library you can import into your web part entry file. And what we're going to do is we're going to, up here, we're going to import star as Microsoft Teams from Microsoft/Teams.js. So that's a new library you have available in 1.8. To be able to, and it has some functions on it that basically allow you to determine whether or not you're inside of a team. And the way that Microsoft recommends we do this is we can basically come down to our web part class here, and we can set a Teams context. So this will be a private variable property on this class called Teams context. That's going to be of type Microsoft Teams.context. And then in our onInit function that we have down here, we had previously used that to set up our SharePoint service that we built throughout the course. But in this case, I want to say if this.context.Microsoft Teams, and again, that's a new property available on your context, your web part context object that lets you know if you're in Microsoft Teams. Then go ahead and return this.context.Microsoft Teams. .get context, whoops, not get chat members, but rather get context, and then take that context and go ahead and set this.teams context to context. And all that's going to do is just update our private Teams context variable to equal the web part context or the Microsoft Teams context in our web part itself. And now that we have that, whenever we go to render our web part, for example, or we could pass this private variable down to our React components, we can do whatever we want with it. But just as an example, you could very easily say, if this.teams context, every time you render this, then do something like console.log hello from Teams. And you could do whatever you want with that. You don't have to do this, I don't believe, but you may find yourself in situations where you want to detect whenever you're displaying inside of a Teams tab, and this is how you would do that. Okay, and in order to test this in Microsoft Teams, we're going to have to deploy this to our SharePoint environment. So it's always a good idea when you're making an update to go to your package solution.json file, go ahead and update the version number from the previous one to a new version number. So I'm going to update this to 1.2 in this case. And I believe as long as we've done everything right, we're ready to go ahead and deploy this and test it out as a Microsoft Teams tab. So let's jump into our console here. I'm going to close our local dev server. Let's clear the console so it's a little simpler, a little cleaner to look at. And as we learned in the deployment video, you would normally run gulp run bundle in ship mode. But just a little trick, this is something I use. I actually have an alias set up to do this, so I can just type ship and it does it all at once. But in case you find yourself doing this a lot, you can use the double ampersand to kind of tie commands together in the command line. And I can run gulp run bundle in ship mode and then it's not gulp run bundle, but gulp bundle in ship mode, and then run gulp package solution in ship mode, and then open SharePoint/solution. I think that's the folder, and the open command will actually open that in Finder so you're ready to drag and drop. This is just kind of a neat little thing. Again, I added as an alias in case you want to save that in your command line, but it'll just kind of run all three of those commands in sequence. And you'll see it'll go ahead and bundle up our solution, then it'll package it, and then it's going to open the build folder so that we can easily drag and drop our package file into the app catalog. Okay, cool. So it went ahead and opened this folder for us. We now have our dash.sppkg file. We're ready to update our app catalog. So let's go into our actual SharePoint environment. I'll go to the app catalog site. We'll go to apps for SharePoint. You'll see we had that previous dash client-side solution is currently version 1.1. Let's go ahead and drag and drop version 1.2 and replace it. And I believe with Microsoft Teams tabs, you must have them deployed to all sites in the organization. I don't think it works with when you don't do the tenant deploy option. So again, we went over that in the deployment section of our course. So in case you missed that, you may want to go back and check that out to learn about the whole tenant deployed, admin deployed thing. But you do need to make sure this box is checked in order to use this in Microsoft Teams. We'll go ahead and deploy that. Now that it's deployed, I always like to make sure when I'm updating that the file is also checked in. So I'll go to Advanced, Check In, click on OK. And now that that is checked in, previously when this was in preview and even shortly after they released 1.8, you had to create a zip file and then upload that to Microsoft Teams. But now they've actually made this super, super easy. You'll notice in the Files tab of the ribbon, they've added a new button that just says Sync to Teams. And according to Microsoft documentation, this doesn't necessarily even work for every tenant yet. So it's kind of a in development thing, but I'll show you another way to deploy it too. If this for some reason is not working for you, you can do what's called sideloading your Teams tab. And what that's going to involve is just go ahead and open up your Teams folder from your solution, take the contents of that folder and create a zip file. So on a Mac, I can just hit compress and I'll just rename this to dash.zip in this case. I'll drag that into my downloads folder so that we have that easy and ready to go. Let's jump into Microsoft Teams. And what we're going to do is within one of your teams, we're going to go to add a tab here. So we're going to go to more apps down here, and you'll see at the bottom we have upload a custom app, and we're going to hit upload for Spiritus. And I'm going to choose that dash.zip file that we just created. We'll hit open. And it's going to do a little bit of spinning, and it's going to create a group over here that's your organization name. And then after a moment, you should see the dash web part actually appear inside of that. And there it is. Great. So we have deployed our dash web part as a Teams tab. Now if I go back to my Teams here, we hit the plus and then we just search for dash. You'll see there it is. And there's that icon image that we had uploaded. I'm going to go ahead and install that. And you can see these are that manifest file. That's where all this data is coming from, the title and the description. So you could certainly update that to be more descriptive than this awful description message here. But we're just going to go ahead and hit install. It's going to install our Microsoft Team tab. I'm gonna hit save there. And it's basically going to run the web part on the SharePoint site, but it's going to allow us to edit it using the property pane over on the right. So for example, I have a list in this particular team called daily sale count. We'll go ahead and select some fields and you'll see it is a fully working web part. How cool is that? We could change to a line chart and just type daily sales by team or something like that. The styles are a little different inside of Microsoft Teams, I've noticed. I don't know if they plan to fix that, but you may need to go back and do a little bit of styling to get it looking just the right way. But in general, it seems to work really, really well in terms of running the web part inside of a team. All the same functionality that we had before is now present in our web part, but we can view it right from the Teams app or Teams within the web browser itself. All right, and the next thing we're going to do is convert our web part so it supports single part app pages. So we are in our web part manifest file. In addition to the Teams tab, which we added before, we're going to add SharePoint full page to the supported host. And that is literally the only change we need to make to our web part code. I do, however, want to jump into the config file and update the version to 1.3 because we're going to be updating this version. And we'll go ahead and jump into the console and we will run our gulp bundle gulp package solution and just go ahead and build and package up the solution so it is ready to deploy to our app catalog. All right, so there is our solution that has been built. Let's jump back into the web browser and in the app catalog, we'll go ahead and drag and drop 1.3. We'll go ahead and check the file in as well. And with that done, let's switch over to a page I've already set up on a SharePoint dev site. Just a new modern page I called full dashboard. And the next step is just go ahead and configure your new web part. We'll add a dash web part here and just configure your single app page web part however you would want to configure it once you have it converted into a full page app. So in this case, we will choose a list called system status. I'll add a couple columns to this list. We'll have it just be a really simple bar chart. We'll do horizontal bar, system status like so. It looks like I probably could have updated my add color text is way too big. That's an easy CSS fix if we want to do that later, but I'm not going to do that right now. I do, however, want to add a new color, maybe a couple of colors for our bar chart so we have a little bit of variety there. Looks good. And finally, let's go ahead and publish this page so it is all ready to go. Now, in order to convert this to a full page, I always forget the way to say it, single part app page is the way they describe this. So if we want to convert this to a single part app page, we need to change the page layout. And that's actually a new feature that's coming to modern pages in SharePoint that I think most people are really excited about. It's something we had in the classic experience that has been sorely missing from modern pages ever since they launched. And what we actually have to do is unfortunately, because the page layout feature isn't here yet, we're going to have to change this page layout using code. And there's a special page layout we can change it to that'll convert this into a single part app page. And you guys can find a link to this. I have this page already open here in the video description down below, but there's a section on it that says changing page layouts using JavaScript in the browser console. And so we're just gonna click on this copy button to copy this script. We're gonna go back here. I'm gonna open up our console. Let's clear it and paste this in. I'm gonna need to change these two variables at the top. So first of all, our site URL is gonna be this, and our page URL is going to be that right there. And we'll go ahead and just hit enter to go ahead and run this. It's gonna say done. And then I can go ahead and give this page a refresh and you'll see we have now converted it into a single part app page. Most of the page Chrome, if you will, most of the page UI has disappeared. The title has disappeared. We still get a left nav and a top nav. but all the edit page functions and everything has disappeared, converting this into a really simple minimalistic web part, which you can see has grown really, really big. So we have a huge bar chart here, but you may imagine some scenarios where you want to completely take over the UI of the page and do all sorts of neat stuff with it. All right, so the next thing we're going to do is we're going to add theme variant support to our web part. So as of right now, if we are to just run a gulp serve and check out this web part, you'll notice that there is a new feature in SharePoint Modern Pages where anytime you have a section, that's the little buttons over here, you'll notice it says move section and edit section, and then you can insert a new section using these blue buttons up here. But anytime you have a section, you can now edit that, and you have this new capability to change the section background. And that's quite interesting because that introduces some challenges for us as developers. So for example, if I configure a web part here and I say web part title, and we have our web part all configured. And now if I go in as a user and I edit the section background, you'll notice all of your classic web parts that are going to be placed into these sections with section background colors will be placed on a white background, because in the past we always worked on under the assumption that it was always going to be placed on a white background. But now with the addition of section backgrounds, if you have not designated your web part as supporting theme variants, so basically supporting theme colors, then you're going to get a white background and your web part will not be transparent. And that might look a little bit jarring because all of the default web parts that Microsoft gives you, as you'll notice here, they do have transparency. So if you want to be able to have a transparent web part, or if you want a web part that adjusts with the theme as the user changes the theme between all the different options that they have, then you're going to need to update your web part to explicitly whitelist or say, hey, we support these theme variants. And not only that, but in addition to just having some light background colors like you see here, we have strong or high contrast themes where you can see the default text web part change to white text, and our web part title is hidden. You'll see its default color, which is being inherited, is now displaying white on white, which makes it invisible. And that is certainly an issue that you may run into when you're working with these theme variants in the new section background colors. So let's jump into Visual Studio Code and let's go ahead and change our web part manifest file to first of all indicate that we do support theme variants. So let's jump down here near the top. We're going to say supports theme variants, and we're simply going to set that to true. That's a new option you can have in your web part manifest file. And immediately when we do that, if we come back and we stop this task and we rerun gulp serve to kind of reload the manifest file, close the old workbench, and we'll add a new instance of our web part here. It's going to do that thing where it reloads again. Let's go ahead and configure another web part here using the default settings. We'll add chart title up at the top. And now when we add a background color, you'll notice it is transparent. So we can now read our white text on top of the background color. And all we did was we added supports theme variants true, and that added the transparency so that it can the section background color can show through. Now, you may also need the content within your web part to change based on the theme that is selected. And that means that you may need to actually have access to the theme data, because it's not necessarily just going to be like a CSS thing that you can always adapt to. You may need to have access to data about the theme that the user has selected. And those changes can actually occur while the page is loaded. It can occur client side, so it doesn't actually refresh the page when a theme is applied to a modern team site. or a modern page in SharePoint, those changes can actually occur while the page is being viewed. And that means that you need to basically subscribe to an event in your web part and say, hey, when the user applies a new theme, I want to be notified, and then I want to get the data about that theme, and I can use that data to change the way my web part or my extension is actually rendered. So in order to do this, we do need to go into our Visual Studio Code. And now that we've said this supports theme variants, we can open up our dash web part file. And we're going to create two new variables on our class, our dash web part class here. So we'll just say theme variants, and we'll say private theme provider, and that'll be of type theme provider. And whenever you use autocomplete, it will import that into the solution from SP component base. And we're also going to create a private theme variant, which is of type, I think it's iRead-only theme. Yeah, there it is, iRead-only theme, or it could possibly be undefined, because the user doesn't necessarily always apply a theme variant. You could just have the default theme. So again, it's going to import iRead-only theme from SP component base, and we're going to set these two as private properties on the dash web part class. And those are undefined at the moment. We have not set them to anything. So we're going to scroll down here and use our onInit method. And let's add some comments because this is getting a little bit lengthy. So let's say set up SP service, and then down here, this was get teams context. And in between those, we're going to add get theme variant. So whenever the web part is initialized, let's go ahead and get the theme provider and the theme variant. That's kind of how it is architected and how it works in SharePoint Framework 1.8. So we'll basically say this.theme provider is equal to this.context, and the web part context now contains a service scope.consume theme provider.service key. And I don't quite follow the logic of why it's set up like this, but basically this is how you initialize the theme provider. And then once you've initialized the theme provider, you can say this.theme variant is equal to this.theme provider.try get theme. And that's actually the method on the theme provider object that returns if you hover over it, it returns the iRead-only theme or undefined, and it basically gets the theme. And then once you have that, check out all this cool data you have. You have this.theme variant and then actually you have to put this in a conditional. So if you were to say, because it could be undefined. So if we say this.theme variant is truthy, and then you do this.theme variant dot, and then you have all kinds of cool stuff on this. So we have a palette, we have is inverted, we have information about the fonts, etc. But the most basic one, and probably the one that you're going to use the most, is going to be semantic colors. And then that object has all sorts of colors about the current theme that is applied to the page. So I can get the neutral colored links for action buttons, for example, or one that I use all the time is body text. So you'll see this one right here is the default color for text, which if you're switching to like a dark theme, it'll change the default text to white, for example. And you just get all sorts of useful information on this theme variant that you can use to react to theme changes inside of your web part or your extension. But this only initially gets the theme variant when the page loads. Again, you could also have themes that are applied or theme changes that occur while the page is being viewed without a refresh. So this won't necessarily stay up to date. If the user changes it, your web part won't be notified of those changes. So we also need to add a listener to say, hey, when the user changes the theme, we need to update our theme variant. And so let's listen for theme changes. So that's going to look like this. We'll say this.theme provider.theme changed event.add. And that takes two parameters here. It takes an observer and an event handler. So the observer will be this, that's the web part itself will be the observer. And then we're going to create a new method on this class called this.onThemeChanged. So we'll create that event down below. We haven't created that yet, so you'll see an error initially. But now if we go down below our onInit method, we can say private onThemeChanged, and that's going to return void. And if this does take an argument, if you just hover over this add method up here, you'll notice it the event handler gets event args, which are of type, where did that go? I keep missing it. Theme changed event args. And again, it returns void. So what we'll do is we'll accept arguments, args, theme changed event args. And then now within here, we can say this.theme variant is equal to args.theme. And then we do need to re-render our web part because it is a React web part. It won't necessarily react to this property being changed, even if we're passing this down to our React components. We need to say this.render to re-render the web part and apply any theme changes that actually occurred. And whoops, I missed an E here. That's why the yellow squiggly is there. And now all should be well. So what we'll do for now is we'll just simply say console.log new theme applied. And then we'll say args.theme to kind of log that out to see what that looks like. So for now, we're just going to log it. Let's jump into our local workbench, which looks like it has refreshed. And if we open our console and we change our background color, oh, maybe we do need to. Oh, whoops, we have a build error. Theme variant is declared, but value is never used. So I need to use that somewhere. So actually, we'll just change this to this.theme variant, because that's going to equal the same thing. There we go. And that should get rid of the build error. So it's going to rebuild. All is well. We'll jump back into the browser, which is refreshing. Let's clear this. And now as we change our theme, you'll see it says new theme applied. You get all sorts of information about the theme. Every time that change occurs, which could be a section background color, but that could also be like a theme change. You could actually apply a theme to the whole site as well. So this could occur multiple times, but you'll see you have all kinds of information about fonts that occur in this theme. You have information about the palette, which gives you all kinds of CSS colors. And of course that you have those semantic colors, like I showed you before, which just has a ton of stuff in it, but it's going to give you all sorts of information that's going to be applicable based on the section background and the theme that's applied to the site. And it can be a great way to kind of adjust how your web part looks. And now if we want to make further customizations in our web part based on this theme data that we're now providing to our web part, in this case, it is a React-based web part. So we need to make sure that we're passing this data that we have here down to the React components that are going to need it. So that's a fairly easy and straightforward thing to do now that we have this.theme variant. I'm going to take out that console.log, and what we'll do is we're going to scroll up, and whenever we mount our dash component, we're going to go ahead and pass theme as this.theme variant. So we'll pass that down. We will need to update our i-props to include theme, which is of type I-read-only theme or undefined. And it's going to import that at the top here. And now that we've passed that down to dash, let's take a look at this component. And you'll see this, basically all it does is mount a chart component here. So we're going to need to do the same thing. In this case, we're going to add theme equals this.props.theme. So we're passing this down to the chart component, which will need to have its props updated as well. So we'll add theme of type I-read-only theme or undefined to our chart. And now our chart component has the theme data available as well. And now with this data available to our chart component, we can use it to, for example, you can see there's an accessibility issue when we have the strong theme, I think it's called, or the strong section background color applied. Our button here is disappearing when we hover over it. So just an example, what we could do now that this is available is we can go to our render function. We can find where we're outputting our action button in this case, and we can add, for example, a style attribute to this component. And in JSX or TSX, the way you can set the style is basically you just pass in an object. In this case, we'll set the color on the object, which can now equal this.props.theme. And then this could be falsy. It could be undefined, so we need to kind of do a ternary operator to check to see if it exists. And if so, we can say this.props.theme.semantic colors and then we'll choose body text, which is the default color for text. That's one that I use quite a bit. And this is a ternary operator, so we need to provide a default value if theme is not set, which will just set it to inherit in this case. And then now that we save that, we should come back and this is going to refresh. And you'll see now we have white text on the button, so it's a little more accessible. As we change our background section, you'll see it's always going to be visible because we're changing that based on our theme variant that is being passed down. And you could furthermore pass that to the icon color. You could pass it to our legend labels. Chart.js has configuration for the color of all the tick lines and the grid lines and the labels, and you can kind of read their documentation on how to do that. But you basically just repeat that process and pass those semantic colors to all the different elements and things that need them, and that allows you to completely change the way your web part works based on how the theme and the section background is being configured. All right, so the next thing we have in the huge list of things that are new in SharePoint Framework 1.8 is domain isolated web parts. And this is a wonderfully complex diagram that Microsoft has provided that explains a little bit about the use case and how you're going to configure this. Honestly, I don't think this is a good demo to do in this video. We already have so much stuff to cover in this video because 1.8 is just chock full of good stuff, but you can kind of see how the basic structure is, and especially if you're working with external APIs like Microsoft Graph or Azure AD, this can be a very good security consideration to kind of domain isolate your web part. You do have to host your web part, I believe, out on Azure, or an external location, so you wouldn't be able to host it from the app catalog like we've been doing throughout this series, but you can kind of read all their documentation. I'll post a link in the video description in case you want to learn more about that. Also in 1.8, we have the idea of library components. And this is actually a really major feature. It's only in beta or preview at the moment, so you can play around with it using the -- plus beta flag whenever you're running the Yeoman generator to generate a new 1.8 solution. But basically, whenever this drops, we're definitely going to do a video to cover that. I don't know that I want to do that during preview, but it's going to be a really cool feature because back in 1.7, the last update that they made, they introduced this idea of dynamic data. So you can pass dynamic data properties back and forth between web parts, which is great. Definitely something we needed in SharePoint Framework. But library components are kind of similar in that they can talk to your not only just web parts, but also extensions. And it's the same goes for your dynamic data. It's kind of something that everything in the context of the page can talk to. So extensions can read dynamic data or provide dynamic data. Also, web parts can read and write dynamic data. And in the case of library components, you can almost think of them as like a hidden library that you don't see on the page, so the user doesn't interact with it, but it's some kind of shared code or code splitting where you could take some kind of shared functionality that you might normally have to bundle into every single one of your web parts or your extensions that you're building, but you can separate it out into a library component, which will then allow that to be served to the other web parts and extensions on the page. And that's going to be huge for performance because basically you don't have to keep writing. Like if you have some sort of abstraction for an API or something, you don't have to bundle that with every single solution that you build. You can create a separate library component that is installed separately. Keep your download sizes smaller because you don't have to rebundle that in every solution, extension, or web part that you're building. And you can just maintain that code in the library component. And then your web parts and your extensions can kind of just consume that. And they don't have to actually have it in their code base, which is very, very cool. So like I said, whenever that releases to full release, we're definitely going to do a video and a demonstration on how to use that. Feel free to use the plus beta flag to go ahead and preview that now. I think it's going to be a really good addition to the SharePoint framework. It's going to open up a lot of new avenues on how we can architect our solutions. And that's going to do it for all the great stuff you have in 1.8. It is quite a handful of things that you have now available in this latest version of SharePoint Framework. So stay tuned for future updates. We're always going to keep you guys up to date as new releases come out for SharePoint Framework, and we look forward to seeing you in a future lesson.